Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sisyphus 55 podcast. Today I'm joined by one of my favorite content creators, FD Signifier. Maybe some of you know of his work. He especially blew up recently due to his MANOSPHERE series. He did 3 very long videos that were very in-depth and
very long.
Yeah. No, I really appreciated them, and I think you also got a lot of positive feedback about those videos. But would you like to introduce your channel?
I'm FD Signifier, and it's the FD Signifier YouTube channel. My content is, I guess, broadly around social commentary with a general focus on Black people, Black issues, and with a more explicit focus on Black masculinity.
This video is sponsored by Babel. Living in Montreal means that I'm regularly exposed to French. Despite this, I spend most of my time avoiding having to speak French, which I think has really limited my experience here. But when I finally decided to learn French, I struggled to find where to begin. Thankfully, Babel exists. These short 10-minute interactive lessons work perfectly to start practicing French. Within 3 weeks of doing these daily, I already noticed that my speaking ability and comprehension improved significantly. Le médecin. Le médecin. This is probably because these lessons are designed by real language teachers instead of AI or machine learning algorithms used by other language learning apps. Start speaking a new language in 3 weeks with Babel. Get 60% off your subscription or scan the QR code. Let me know which language you would like to learn and why in the comments below.
Early on in my career on YouTube, which is about a year old now, I think the Bo Burnham video, which is what blew me up my first major blow up, that was this time last year. And as soon as I started getting a buzz and people kind of got wind that I was like a straight Black man that wasn't right-wing alpha male podcast talking head type of guy, they were like, oh, could you please say something about the manosphere? Please make a video about the manosphere. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. That sounds awful. And over time, I realized, especially as I got further into like the world of content creation, I kind of understood more in depth what's the word I'm looking for? The gravity of the situation online and how it's affecting youth and how it's affecting older adult Black men and men in general. And realizing that I was kind of in a unique space for my explicit, identity. I was like, okay, it's almost like Spider-Man, with great power, with decent clout comes great responsibility. Basically, what it came down to. And so I said to myself, I'm going to get a handful of these ideas out, and then I'm going to get to a certain point. And once I get to that point, I'll make a Manosphere video. And I had it in my head that point was going to be nearing 300,000 subscribers. And it was fine because, as you alluded to before we got on, my educational background, I am ABD. I don't know what, does everybody know? I'm ABD for my PhD, which basically means I did everything but the dissertation. And I don't plan on finishing it. And it's mostly been about very, very closely aligned to like how the manosphere works, which is why I think people resonated with the insight I provided, because it was different than just, debunking their talking points. It was a critical, to say the thing, dissection of how it works and why it works. And I'm just kind of rambling here, so feel free to cut in to guide me, because I kind of lost where I was supposed to go with the intro. But I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. I think that was a very good, just general outline of exactly what we're going to discuss. Especially the whole, I mean, the Spider-Man analogy is that you did play
Yeah,
a very, I think, integral role that other creators can't quite reach. And it's because, compared to maybe more right-wing discourse that likes to entertain the idea of like the marketplace of ideas where everybody's identity is supposedly non-racial, non-gendered, and it's really just a rational discourse wins over everyone else, is really, if you're talking about something like the manosphere, it does matter,
right.
your like who you are, like what sort of ethnicity you belong to, your gender, your background, your orientation, and specifically, the thing that I appreciated is that you are, in some ways, an outsider of the space, or at least an outsider of the targets of the space, because there is like a whole kind of, at least when you look at like masculinity on a historical level, it does tend to exclude certain minorities. Like,
Right.
there's, the white man is kind of the closest
This,
to reaching
that's
the
the
hegemonic.
yeah, we would say that's the hegemonic
Mhm.
standard is like the I've heard it described as the international businessman, white businessman. That
Yes.
is Dorian Gray
Hmm.
from 50 Shades of Grey. And
Yes.
I'm a kind of, fluffy black guy with dreadlocks with you know, relatively far from that ideal, but I think it also, because one thing I also think about is I'm also kind of an outlier on breadtooth.
Mm.
He's quote unquote breadtooth because I'm older than everybody else in the space that's still posting regularly. I think ContraPoints is probably in her late 30s. But other than that, I don't think anybody that's like relatively significant on the space is over, in their early 30s at most. Um,
Hmm.
and then I also I have, and this is kind of important for the video's lore to an extent, is that I have accomplished my, supposed biological imperatives as a man, in that I've married a woman, and we have a pretty traditional, relatively traditional marriage. I have two children. So I've accomplished a lot of things that typical manosphere people would say to throw, to disregard me outright. They can't. Now, of course, it doesn't stop them from just saying that I am secretly gay, or that I'm secretly involved in polyamory, or that I'm a cuckold. Is they still do that, but
Hmm.
like now it's even more transparently nonsensical. The one thing that I don't think I've mentioned this in all the times I talked about it, is I put my face in this thumbnail, which is something I didn't do for pretty much any of my videos long
Hmm.
term. I think maybe a couple when I was trying to like figure out how YouTube worked. They say, yeah, put your face in the thumbnail. I'm like, all right, and like, it's not working for me, but we'll see. But I put my face in this one because I wanted people to know that this is a man talking about the manosphere. Um, and I think carried, for what it's worth, it carries some of that weight from as in a rhetorical sense. Like it doesn't carry weight, I think, genuinely, but in a rhetorical sense, as a strategy for validating my ideas, especially to this explicit community, to have it come from a masculine presenting man who can check off all these boxes. Uh, that was meaningful.
Well, I do think that it does validate it. At least, what I was arguing in the Manosphere video is that your videos, because you're both kind of an outsider, but then also in some ways an insider, because you've achieved certain externalities that this group would, kind of seek, and they would see that as like, oh, you're achieving like peak masculinity. You're able to kind of reach across and sort of humanize their issues in a way as an out group member,
Yeah,
to this in group, and that's what I was kind of interested in, was, it's this whole concept of like the cycle of dehumanization, which comes up in a lot of psychology studies, and it usually has to do with race. And it's the sad fact that you can ask different racial groups to, like, rate the extent to which they think a certain racial group is human to not human, and people will
give you various answers. And in the U.S., for example, white Americans will put themselves as almost 100% human, and then Arabic it might go down a little bit. And that in itself is kind of already known to a certain degree, but it's also the fact that when these groups that are being perceived as less human like actually notice that they're being dehumanized, they will then dehumanize the group that's dehumanizing them, and then you can
Right.
see a cycle develop quite quickly. And there is also this kind of idea that if you humanize them, it's meta-humanization, that it can reverse these effects. And it doesn't mean this sort of like centrism of like, oh, they're also right in some ways. It's just
Yeah.
like hearing them out. And I think that's kind of one of the main focuses of your video is you really explore these kind of relative deprivations of various forms of masculinity, and you go into like, you know, these guys do feel bad, like they are having a tough time. And I think it's similar. Your story is weirdly similar in a way to Jordan Peterson's, because he is also in some ways traditionally he would be seen as an outgroup member of traditional masculinities.
Right.
He's kind of a skinny, high pitched academic who's a little bit weird and a little bit overly passionate, and he cries a lot, and it wouldn't really cover
Part of
those.
me wishes, sorry, part of
Oh,
me
it's good.
wishes that Jordan Peterson wasn't like his politics weren't what they are, because I love how weird he is. I'm a
Hmm.
fan of weird people in general.
Hmm.
Um, I was having a conversation with CJ the X for this upcoming video about Ayn Rand, and how like if you were able to pull away the hyper capitalist you know hyper individualist cruelty of her philosophy at its core, you would have this like really interesting horny woman that the left would love. you
Yep.
know
Yeah.
um and but that's kind of it's funny, I've accused other people of being the black Jordan Peterson, but I think you just made me realize that I'm the black Jordan Peterson, and
I mean,
I don't know
there's
how I feel
certain
about that.
there's certain important differences. I think.
Yes, several,
Yeah.
several, but
Yeah.
the appeal, it just, you really kind of illustrated that to me, because I have a lot of, I was surprised after the first Manosphere video going into the second one. I don't want to derail because I got the lore of this video I haven't had a chance to talk about.
Mhm.
So I know I cut you off, so I want you to
Oh no,
finish.
it's
So,
okay.
sorry about that.
Yeah, I think. I mean, you kind of said what I was going to say was that you in a similar way you had the ability to kind of reach across as a sort of outgroup member and kind of humanize this group. And I think, hopefully, I don't know, maybe you would only know from your responses. I personally felt, I mean, like I'm a straight white guy, and it's not all sunshine and roses, but it's also like there are people that are doing worse. But it was interesting to hear from somebody who maybe we wouldn't share much of the same background, that you were able to define a lot of specific kind of deprivations and points of like suffering and vulnerabilities and stuff that at least my group in an intersectional sense would be dealing with. And I think that
Yeah,
that's very important. And I think Peterson did the same thing. And that's why he was able to kind of get in that space and be heralded as who he is. And I remember visiting, some people. I'm from Alberta, which is a very conservative place. There were some guys that they'd go work out in oil fields, and they're like very right wing, but they were talking about like Dostoevsky and Nietzsche all of a sudden. And it's because Peterson was able to he was able to at least like implant in their minds like maybe this sort of discourse is also kind of masculine. And hopefully in the same way you're able to kind of implant maybe there's sort of left leaning discourses that could also be seen as masculine for people that are very tied up in wanting to prove that they're men. And that's a whole other issue that we can get
yeah,
into. But yeah, hopefully
yeah.
that makes
And
sense.
that's kind of no, that makes a lot of sense. And so that comes from some things I mentioned in the video, which is my first year teaching,
Mm.
uh, which I had encountered for the first time in my life, white poverty, and that was not sobering, but also kind of like revelatory. It kind of forced me to, re-engage some, uh, uh, can't remember his name right now. I interviewed him for this last year. Jay Smooth, he used the phrase fundamental assumptions, that a lot of us operate off of fundamental assumptions, built off of, prior experience, culture, etc. So as a Black person, I think a lot of us have this fundamental assumption about whiteness, that it is absent of certain um, realities, which we know is not true, but we don't encounter it. There's so much segregation, probably intentionally by the functions of capitalism and neoliberalism. There's so much separation between the Black poor and the white poor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've heard of white poor. I remember the show Trailer Fabulous on MTV when I was in undergrad, which was probably a show that should have never happened, but wouldn't happen today. And so I saw that, but it was different when I had kids who were coming from those trailers, and I'd engage with them like I would other kids, and it was like, okay, I'm seeing so much um, similarity here, and I'm building bonds, and they're just as needy as my Black kids that I've had, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was that, right? That just kind of worked to force me to deconstruct. And this is before I was an intersectional scholar, but this is probably where that my affinity for it came from, because I started understanding that these were white boys, and that they had different capacities and needs based on them being white, or I should say, I had different things I had to do with them, in teaching them and in reaching them based on their whiteness, and then of course based on their maleness. And so the other thing, though, I think I haven't told this story, is that the other part of it was discovering Call of Duty in like 2005 or whenever. At some point in time, I discovered Call of Duty, and I started getting called the N-word a lot. And I was like, why are these? And this is the late 2000s, so this is before internet culture, as it's called, has been understood and entrenched, where it's just an understood thing that prepubescent white boys will call you the N-word online. And so this was like a new phenomenon to me. And so like I would befriend, young white guys in online games, in Call of Duty, Tekken, Soul Calibur, etc. And I'll never forget, I had one guy who he just sounded so miserable. I understood why he was such an asshole, because like everything around his life was shitty, and he had no other outlet except Tekken. And then I beat him. I had the nerve to whip his ass in Tekken, And so it's like, thankfully he never called me the N-word, but I'm sure he called somebody else the N-word. I say all that to say, and this is kind of this is not a good thing, but it speaks to just the nature of division in this country, that a lot of those experiences forced me to like engage certain elements of empathy and perspective and analysis that I hadn't up until that point. Because up until that point, my experience with whiteness was, mostly negative. It was mostly distant. It was distant to negative. I had a handful of really good white friends in like middle school, and then by the time I got to high school, we all had started to self-segregate. Aside from a handful of guys, and even in that realm, you're talking about high school, so you don't really have a frame of analysis. But yeah, so like in my young adulthood, I started developing these analytical frames, and I brought those to the table for that video. And going back to the Jordan Peterson thing, so what that video revealed to me that I wasn't ready for is just how many young, more conservative leaning men, white and Black, that I had pulled in up until that point. And, I am not, I don't know, I'm not Sean, or who does lots of like theory based stuff. I'm not Sean. I'm not like a super overt leftist in my content, but I feel like it's pretty left leaning. It's pretty obvious, especially after I started to get bigger. I felt like that was like a necessary thing to do, was to be more explicit in my content about my political leanings. And so
Yeah, no, I noticed, sorry to cut you off, but I noticed also that I have, because especially philosophy, the genre of philosophy on YouTube, there is like a
Yeah,
lot of, and I think it's because of Jordan Peterson. It's there's certain other channels that they're a little bit ambivalent, but sometimes they say certain things where I'm kind of, and I think they kind of play the sort of this kind of either apolitical philosophy or a little bit
right.
slightly like right wing, maybe, I don't know, just sort of liberal, classically liberal philosophy. And I had to, although, and I get accused of having like biases in my videos, which every video I've made is biased. I can't make an objective video.
Yeah,
I don't think
I
I
think
can.
objectivity is white supremacy in my opinion. Like that's
Yeah.
that's Jordan Peterson.
Yeah,
But
like I'll make guides on thinkers, but it's like this is, this is my take on it. This isn't there's so many other sources, and it's going to come from a more left leaning discourse. But I noticed that I was starting to shed certain. I like to think of it as like shedding, like some subscribers that I don't think we would align, and there's some of them that they stick around, and they're either willing to listen to you or they're willing to comment mean things every video, and you live with it. But
you get
I
your
think it's a
anti
good
fans.
strategy. Yes.
Yeah,
Still
yeah,
fans, still views.
still views. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
well, some of the emails though,
Yeah. Yeah.
can be a bit much.
Hmm.
But yeah, so those that particular group was somewhat shocked, I think, which I still haven't really like settled with because I can't think to myself how would people be shocked that I was not a Jordan Peterson fan or a Kevin Samuels fan, and generally speaking, a fan of conservatism up until this point. Because I think about the "I Don't Dream of Labor" video. I think about "Break Bread," which was like and the Dave Chappelle video. Like these are all
Hmm.
videos with very clear left leaning angles. Now, maybe it's because I was convincing and they didn't realize that I was maybe I did my job too well in a weird way that I kind of I gave such I like to think I gave such good arguments that they couldn't engage their own uh internal biases in time before they were
Hmm.
convinced of my position. That's what the best I could do. But yeah,
Do you,
go ahead.
do you think it's also maybe because of the fact that, because there is like a lot of just like left leaning and right leaning YouTubers that are just not very critical of the like ideologies themselves. They're always critiquing the other
Right.
ideology, and the fact that like for the Bo Burnham video, for example, you're critiquing white performity or performativism, and
Yeah.
that could be I feel like that would be something that some
Yeah.
conservatives would probably, they would take that and they'd go, oh, he's
He's one of
criticizing
us.
he's criticizing those like white people that tell me I'm being racist. And that's like a,
I guess
I could see certain areas where they might feed into
I
that.
guess I can see that, which is interesting because that comes from a black left perspective,
Hmm.
which is that's a very ironic or paradoxical situation where you know I come in critiquing the left because its version of being a left is uh, not left enough when it comes to black issues, working class issues, and the right here's owning the libs. The right here's
Exactly.
owning the libs,
Yep.
and don't recognize that I like in the last flourish of that Bo Burnham video, I call out Chick-fil-A, and I talk about the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and so I don't know. That is interesting. I mean, I think that speaks to, and this is something I'm kind of like in the middle of chewing on, both as like a person but also as a content creator. The way that political ideals have become such salient identities in the
Hmm.
last, I guess, maybe decade and a half at this point, or at least from my perspective, decade and a half. I'm sure it's not new, but
Hmm.
I'm understanding it to be a thing now. And like it's hard to penetrate someone's identity, and so like people will just filter whatever they receive through that lens and miss so much stuff in the process. It's interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and I do think, I mean, especially the kind of rise of social media and the whole kind of, our identities are more based upon profiles, and profiles have to be very quick summaries of who
Mm,
we are. And what's the best summary you can make of yourself is usually your worldview and like your kind of system of morality. So I think
Right.
it makes sense. Like we're starting to see people as just kind of belonging to certain political classes than like your neighbor or your classmate or something like that.
Right.
Um, yeah, and also the
Super.
pandemic too. I think because that became
Yeah.
politicized and
That was very polarizing
mm,
in a weird way. Super Eye Patch Wolf, who was in the video, I don't know if this, I can't remember if this quote made it in the video, but like he made a really good comment about um, defining yourself based solely off of things you don't like, and how
mm,
that's just a, from the outside just kind of seems like a miserable existence, but also is incredibly, uh, it makes you very easy to target by, ne'er do wells within the manosphere, or anybody that's really looking to harness the life force of young people. The best thing to do is find young people who are easily impressionable, who haven't kind of developed certain identity frames. And then politics is just a really potent one. It's high tier for getting people involved and invested, and understandably so, because we're in many situations we're talking about life and death. So
hmm
yeah.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. To just redirect the conversation slightly, I'm a little bit curious about the abandoned dissertation and kind of your research experience, because it seems to have aided in the Manosphere video to some extent.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really just simply I'm 40 years old and I'm making more money than I've ever made on a normal job, and enjoying that job more than I've ever enjoyed any other normal job. And the only reason, because I don't have any interest in academia,
hmm
I started my PhD program thinking I wanted to get into academia, and after a year and a half in academia, I said I don't want to be in academia. um, but I had already, made a certain amount of efforts, and I had mapped out a different, plan to a career path that would still benefit from me finishing my PhD. Um, and simply put, uh, I during the pandemic I started making videos because I told myself I wanted to try making videos forever, and suddenly I wasn't leaving the house and I had more time on my hands. And you know, uh, a year later, I think is a Bo Burnham video, and like, oh, now I need to quit my job and do this full time. And so like it was, I just can't imagine trying to do a dissertation while still writing videos, especially the ones I write, is many term papers every once a month. So like I just didn't see it, and I was like, I don't see a point to it.
hmm
But if you're asking about like the research, or was it just kind of like the how did I decide to quit?
Oh, I am also quite interested in what you were researching exactly.
Right. Yeah. So my I'm a sociologist by training, um, and I had a focus on kind of a cross section between gender, health, um, and race, but mostly gender and health. And explicitly I was trying to like engage with men's mental health. And so like a lot of my, I don't know, I feel like you were talking in one of your that video and other videos about going back to grad school or being in it.
I just graduated and I spent like most of
Okay, so you,
undergrad in research labs and stuff. So I'm considering going back. But
yes. And so the routine where uh you can develop, so quick pointer for anybody looking into grad school. um you can start developing your expertise with your first paper from freshman year, and like,
mhm.
so literally for all of my master's program, because it's a joint program, I kept writing the same, 3 or 4 papers. If it was a uh I don't know, class on urban sociology, I would figure out how urban sociology connected to black men's issues, or men's mental health in general. And so over time you develop an expertise because you keep on forcing yourself to connect different issues to one particular topic. And that's how most PhDs are. They're not really. The funny joke is most PhDs aren't that smart if you force them to like talk about anything other than what they did their dissertation on. They're like a turtle on their back. Um, so anyway, I kept, coming back to this well about around masculinity, kept pulling on my personal experiences, both, you know, going back to that, you know, half white high school, but also like the black schools I taught at where I spent more time working with young black boys and kind of really engaging directly to what their issues are. And so you combine that with, some of the classics, Foucault, uh, Durkheim, Fanon, Du Bois, etc. And you kind of start to develop analytical frames after you've, ridden that bike enough times.
Okay, that's yeah. So you would have a lot of background when it comes to just the whole theory behind masculinities, and I'm just curious, because I just recently found this. There's like it's the history of virility. There's like it's a very long piece by
Oh,
like quite a few authors where it's just interesting because they talked about the fact that virility used to be what like historically people would refer to as what we refer to now as masculinity. It's that you're being virtuous, and this was like during the Roman period,
mm,
and masculinity, to be masculine, was actually to be kind of way
too
too
much.
drawn, yeah, to be drawn towards like kind of external things and kind of animalistic and stuff. And I thought that was interesting that it kind of blended together, or at least it looks like it did in the Manosphere, where they kind of use um, the kind of virility, the sort of like self control that they're talking about in order to gain those externalities. So it's kind of with the promise of you're going
Yeah,
to have a bunch of partners or you're going to make a lot of money if you have self control. So it's less like autotelic, it's more of like a means to an end.
yeah.
Yeah, if you have any thoughts on that.
That makes a lot of sense. There's like I can't remember where I got it from, but you go to like Roman images of even just men's penises. I'm sorry, not whatever, old art of
Hmm.
men's penises. So I'm thinking of like Greek statues, etc. And that kind of comes from that is actually salient with what you were just talking about, and that the way we talk about it's funny because we talk about masculinity today, and we, they pull tropes from, I don't know, Alexander the Great and the Spartans, etc. Completely losing how a lot of those cultures define masculinity very differently, in ways that would be very transgressive to these manosphere figures, and that's an example of them. So we say, "Oh, well, you look like a Greek statue." Well, a Greek statue would have a very small penis, and like, nothing's wrong with that, but it conflicts with the
Hmm.
manospherian ideal of manhood and masculinity. And so, like when I just kind of looked at this, I looked the book up while you're talking. Yeah, that's really interesting, and it kind of this wasn't an area of like a study for me, but it was something that drove it in terms of thinking about how we have uh, changed the understanding of what a quote unquote real man is innumerable times throughout time.
Hmm.
And at every time, especially in Western thought, the type of man that is a man right now is somehow the only man that's ever existed.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like somebody posted in Reddit like a thread of all the times that people in the news media said what's happening to real men, and it
Hmm.
like went back to like the 1700s. It was an article that had been written, these obviously over by different people, but like over and over again, we seem to be having an air quotes crisis of masculinity.
Hmm.
And I think the real crisis is masculinity under capitalism.
Hmm.
Like it's always going to be in a state of crisis because it's impossible to, you know, the things, going back to the video, the things that most of these men want are visions of capitalistic, they're capitalistic virtues. Um, and there are things they cannot get because you cannot be a provider, You cannot you can't be a high value man without a certain level of income, without certain levels of economic vitality. You don't see too many, you know, young men and boys from legit, upper class backgrounds getting sucked into the manosphere because they have the things the manosphere promises you it will get to you. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's a there's that's why I don't want to stop talking about it, because it's still such an interesting topic. The content I want to chill on because that's my job. And just the way YouTube's algorithm works, you kind of have to be smart about who you bring to the table with every video.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, all right, I need to stop entertaining these motherfuckers with the manosphere, because then I'm gonna just only be a manosphere creator, and I
Well,
don't.
and anytime you critique them, they also make some money because then they can do a reaction, and
Right,
it's
right.
like it just keeps it going. But
I will say I didn't
yep.
see a lot of reactions to my video from, like, for the I got more reaction from the Black Manosphere video than, like, I think the main two Manosphere videos from at least larger creators. I didn't see many large creators touch it at all, which is fine. Like, I was like, dodge the bullet.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's partially just because it is very well grounded and it's quite complex, and I don't think it really serves like the sort of like on Twitch live reaction, like you can like yell
Debunk.
and yeah. So I it's because it's not a debunking video; it's more of like a explanation. Because there's enough debunking videos, and I think that it's really just a dialogue between those two groups, back and forth, that
Yeah,
sustains money for both of them. But
yeah.
I do think like what you're saying about the importance of continually talking about this, I completely agree. And I do think that if anything, this whole kind of looking at the sort of impulse of following certain gender roles um, and masculine identity, especially, is extremely important because I think it reveals kind of the importance of ontological security of identity to begin with. And it is interesting, like you said, that this concept of masculinity seems so historically unstable, but that at every historical period, it's this necessity in stating that this is the masculine ideal. This is like the eternal truth behind what it is to be a man, when it's obviously not
Right.
true. Like it requires that stability in order to function, even though like looking back empirically, there's so much variation in gender roles.
Right.
um it's that's what I was kind of interested in, and that's in my video why I'm more focused on what is like what's causing this sort of like to begin with when you're born, like why do you want to be a man? And I think like Zizek talks about like trans people, for example. He says, and this, whether this is controversial or not, but he says in the same way that Marx talks about, if you want to talk about like the pitfalls of wealth and capital, the best place to look is like at like the breakdown of capitalism, because then you'll see where everything's going wrong. That makes sense. That's pretty
Right.
self evident. With trans people, there is in a similar way, you're looking at a crisis of gender where um, these people are aware of the fact that they want to follow a certain impulse of gender that doesn't align with how they may physically present. And that's a very interesting place to like look at if you want to understand this impulse behind ontological security of like wanting to feel like who you are, and why we attach that to gender norms
Mhm.
especially. And then also how capitalism can kind of co-opt that, because it knows that we care so much about these things, and it says, well, to be a man, you have to participate and perpetuate in this system, even if it doesn't necessarily serve you. Um, but I know I just said a lot, but that is kind of like my main interest is why are we so compelled to follow certain genders to begin with? And I'm not coming from a totally constructionist kind of angle, and or entirely essentialist. I'm genuinely curious about that.
Yeah, so I tend to fall into construction when it comes to gender, because it's because if you look, So is there like, are there biological elements to how gender is constructed? Definitely. But like the way that those biological elements inform the construction of gender, especially in 2022, are, we're talking about fractions of percents compared to 10,000 years ago when we're nomadic tribes,
Mhm.
right? Like, thousands of years ago, before, agrarian, you know, societies began to pop up and people were just traveling around, picking food up off the ground and eating it, for the most of their lifespan. You, the concept of gender was much less rigid, because it's like, I don't care what you wear or how you present or your identity. Are you going to come with me to get these berries? Are you going to
Mhm.
carry these berries? um you know Different historical records say that families were very small, and families that got too large would abandon children because that wasn't possible, um, for a nomadic lifestyle. And then you fast forward to agrarian societies, and you start to see gender becoming more of a thing, because now, this is pulling on some Durkheim, we have the division of labor, and we start to say, well, a man can do this and a woman can do that, and since a woman can't do this, a man should do that, and then we should make sure that everyone who was born a woman aspires to be a woman at the highest regard, and vice versa. And so that's what so much of our society is built on, is coming back to division of labor. It's just that we've assigned virtue, we've assigned divinity to job specifications. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? Like, that is my, I wasn't a huge, I had refused to engage with Jordan Peterson before getting ready to make this video. And of course, I had to make the video, so I had to start watching Jordan Peterson. And while I get the appeal, especially to the people for whom we play a similar role, because we're engaging with the population that has been very much alienated as a product of the design of capitalism. White males are alienated from their humanity from jump, and it's taken as natural, and like everybody is blind to it, including them. And like, who's going to advocate for them for that except for them? And then they don't. That's a
Mhm.
big portion of the video. But anyway, and so, like, as I'm the thing that stood out immediately, aside from the anti-Semitic dog whistles and stuff like that, was that, like, Peterson is convinced that of God's plan of intelligent design, essentially. You
Mhm.
know that I don't know if he's went on record, but I'm sure he's been on that he believes in, like, essentialist ideas of femininity and masculinity, etc. He's argued so much against postmodernism because of his belief in order, right?
Mhm.
And so, no, that shit's just not true. And you see it in so much of how gender plays out differently across time and across space, and across race. And that is what first kind of opened me, because I'm a 40-year-old guy. I was born in the 80s and came of age in the 90s. So I am not this long-standing bastion of leftist progressive thought. I am a regular dude that thankfully had enough experiences to open my mind up to be open to, being an advocate for queer and trans issues, and all these other things I stand for now. But I had to learn that, which meant I had to unlearn the um the fundamentals of how I was taught to see gender. And
Mhm.
once you kind of break those fundamental pieces down, for me, it's hard to see how construction isn't 99% of it, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. I think what I was more concerned with was, why do we rely on, like, why are people so drawn in to the construction? Like, this is like a um
Mm.
more of an abstract
Yeah.
question. And I do think that it falls. I've, and I'm sure that people that have been watching my channel for a while are sick of me referring to Ernest Becker, but I do think that his sort of arguments are like a little bit kind of loosely tied to this, in the sense of like the same reason why people rigidly attach to certain roles or religions or political affiliations. It's he says specifically because of kind of a fear of death, and so the sort of need to kind of have a sort of symbolic legacy. So you're attached to more of like a cultural legacy. You can kind of live on in a way, but more broadly, it's like a discomfort with change or instability, the sort of thing that Jordan Peterson is, he loves to talk about, which is anything that isn't order, like chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, the solution is to double down on order. And that's the same with gender essentialism in general,
Yeah.
is that there are these kind of archetypes that we can rely on that will order our world. And then the sort of constructionist point, I think, where it might maybe not necessarily like a struggle, but where a lot of people might be left kind of going, now what, is that it doesn't offer an ordering principle, and it's critical of the idea of an ordering principle to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think I'm just kind of wondering is why gender identity relies on, or why we rely on gender identity for something that will order us. Like, why are we so willing to kind of lie to ourselves about the fact that it's constructed? And we continually historically go back to growing up wanting to be the best man you can be. And it's usually men. And there are studies that it looks like masculinity is more tied to self-esteem than femininity, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is also an interesting point of discussion. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it goes to, you know, so you were saying, what did you say? I immediately thought of this. You said death. So I would flip that and say survival.
Mm,
Um, in that, so a story I consistently bring up when I talk about masculinity is the fact that I would say maybe the vast majority of boys in this country for generations, mine definitely included, were taught not to cry before they were potty trained.
mhm,
Or write, if they're lucky, right when, before they entered kindergarten, they were taught that boys don't cry and disabused of that fundamental human form of communication for all children. Um, and why and how and why did that happen? The how is possibly through violence and abuse.
mhm,
Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Stop crying or I'll give you another one. Like those are words that echo in my brain. Those are words that I've overheard for over the course of my life, directed towards boys. um so and then the why is because a boy doesn't cry, because you need to perform gender appropriately. And if you don't perform gender appropriately, there are consequences.
mhm.
And so as a out pouring as a word as a out something from that, you then develop a whole other level sets of schema around being a man, being a big boy, being an alpha, insert whatever euphemisms for performing masculinity. And so those you never at any point are introduced to the constructionist uh, perspective on performing gender. That would be incredibly transgressive to how we utilize gender in this country.
Mhm.
Um, and so, like, I think it's my perspective is that it's actually just pretty simple. We make it happen. We make children believe a certain thing about gender. We uh, in that process of forcing that on them, we speak to it as natural. We speak to it as innate. We speak to it as divine. And like the changing of that at any point in life is a deeply um that's a significant undertaking to go
Mhm.
from I understand manhood and masculinity to be these things that I was taught when I was 3, that have been reinforced by my media, my community, my life and lifestyle. Performing is, it's also understand, like, because none of this happened in a vacuum, right? So performing masculinity is in some ways rewarding. If I, depending on what you consider rewarding to be, but if I perform masculinity appropriately, I will be more successful in my work. I will attract more women. I will have more money. I will be in better health as a out. God, there's a phrase. There's a word there that I probably use all the time, and then just tonight, it's after soccer practice and writing, it's gone. But you get my point. Like,
Mhm.
masculinity begets all these benefits. So we're talking about social conditioning from the time you're able to communicate at 3 or 4 years old. We're talking about social sanction at the same time. We're talking about societal reinforcement at every venue of communication and media. And then we're talking about personal experience of seeing how depending on the time and space, how the masculine boys and men are rewarded for their masculinity. And you want those rewards. And so, yeah, when it comes down to trying to explain to, a 25-year-old manosphere guy why they should just use somebody's appropriate pronouns uh, to them. Also, and there's the last thing, which all the things I'm talking about are hegemony,
Mhm.
right? They are the overriding zeitgeist of thought for a culture, for a community. And like, that one, the nature of hegemony, I think maybe is beyond my effective reasoning at this point, because I think it just speaks to maybe some innate human instincts that of community and belonging and um, you know wanting order. So hegemony provides that. And so what you're asking people to do when they deconstruct gender is to divest from hegemony at a fundamental level.
Mhm.
And I get that's one reason why I'm empathetic, and I hold space for people who are struggling, especially people my age who haven't had the, like, young people today, like my son's is, already much further along than like that, I was as a 9-year old and understanding the nature of gender. But like me as a 9-year old, I couldn't play with anything pink. So I hold space for people who are slow to understanding the necessity of, respecting trans issues, respecting gender, respecting queer issues, etc., because they've literally been taught to demonize that concept um, intensely.
Mhm.
And so you come and you say to them, no, that's wrong. And like, they may draw their sword. Those are fighting words to them, because what you're saying is their entire understanding of the world is wrong. You know. So I don't
Hmm.
know. I hope that kind of answered the question. At a minimum, I'm sure it sounded good. So.
Yeah. No, I think that was very insightful. I think so. Kind of what you're saying is you know maybe to hopefully summarize it is you're born, you you need to survive. The world is tough in various ways, and kind of a good way to survive first of all is to maybe to know yourself and understand yourself, so you're able to kind of behave in ways that will enable for survival. And you're kind of brought up in a system that through reinforcement and like social learning and so forth that teaches you the ways to survive, and these are more reinforced by the fact that the society that you're brought into functions under this kind of these social constructions. And that's what makes it so. And then also on top of that, not only is it teaching you how to survive, it's also teaching you how to maybe like feel good sometimes, because
Yeah.
there's
Teaches you how to
benefits to it.
thrive. There's
Hmm.
benefits. It's maybe, I won't. I always want to be careful when speaking on transness in the absence of trans people,
Hmm.
because I don't know, but I've learned a lot. And one thing that I think is interesting, I feel like I've learned a lot about understanding gender, my own like gender expression and experience, from like the because to be trans, you kind of become an expert on it, in a way.
Mhm.
But euphoria is what I'm leading up to. Um, when and where do you feel gender euphoria?
Mm.
And so, like, some of that is still going to be constructed because, like, I feel euphoric when I get some shit done. I feel euphoric when I spend time with my wife. When my children perform, when my children do good, right? I feel like I am fulfilling my role as a man in society, in this household, etc. And
Mhm.
so that comes from that conditioning, and very much so. But it feels genuine and innate.
Mhm.
It doesn't. I don't think of Durkheim when my son scores a soccer goal.
Mhm.
What I'm saying? So, like, and that's kind of the complexity of so much of what we're talking about. It's like we're pathologizing and philosophizing around uh the innate functions of the heart,
Mhm.
and there's always so much room for error there. But yeah, I was just kind of saying that to piggyback off of your kind of, you're doing a much better job than me of explaining what I thought.
Oh.
I don't know if I always love how, like, my brain will just shit thoughts when I'm this is why I'm not a for all the debate invites I've gotten. I'm like, that's never gonna happen
Oh,
because
I
my,
couldn't do that. I
yeah,
that scares me.
it's like I'm not gonna let my id just spill all over a microphone live in front of people that don't like me. I need to sit there and curate exactly what I'm trying to say so that it hopefully makes sense. And you're
Well,
doing a
that's
good job, Philip.
Thanks. Well, I mean, that's another, I mean, maybe just a little bit of an aside, but an interesting thing I find between left leaning spaces and right leaning spaces is that right leaning, it's kind of reinforced to be the kind of edge lord and to
Yeah.
kind of,
Loud and wrong.
yeah, self identify with social rejection. So it's a lot less cognitively taxing to, at least I think, to be in those spaces and to be an advocate of those spaces. And there's, I mean, there's gish galloping and stuff like
Yeah.
that, where it's very, it seems very easy, honestly. You just yell, whereas like left leaning spaces, because it's a bit of a like dog chasing its own tail sometimes, and it's a lot of self criticism and very like very preoccupied with the use of language and words, which isn't necessarily
Right.
wrong, but it's it makes sense why it's easier for one space to thrive more, and especially to target those who are perhaps less cognitively developed, such as like 12 to 14-year-olds.
Right. Boys who are having their first wet dreams. Yeah, they're an easy target.
Yeah.
A very easy target to hit.
Well, we're almost reaching an hour, but I was just wondering if you have any short kind of words of advice for men that are maybe kind of teetering that line, although it's very unlikely that they would have reached the
Found
end of
you.
this episode. Yeah, or
uh,
nonetheless.
well, so whoever's here and listening, I had a conversation with another creator a couple of nights ago that has been sticking in my ribs since then, because it connected to a traumatic experience that I dealt with some years back. So I guess I'll give a quick content warning for self harm. Um, but the short version is, a young person that I was connected to completed in 2018, right under my nose, and it's something that has haunted me in many ways, especially as I enter into YouTube, because we were working together um, for him to develop, like, my art, and I had a whole different plan for how I was going to make YouTube videos because I didn't want to appear on camera, and he was designing this, like, avatar that was a black robot with an afro. It was awesome. um and so, like, and then, like, he kind of disconnected, and I was chasing him down and trying to check on him, and then I just got an update that he had killed himself. He was 24. And so I was just like, and he was a young black man. Not that black men don't commit suicide, because that is a very unfortunate mythology around black men's mental health. Um, but I didn't see it in him. He was an artsy guy. He was fun loving. He was all the things that, in retrospect, if you know about self harm, which I did,
Mhm.
you know that those are warning signs to an extent, that for him to go from being gregarious and bubbly to withdrawing so much. In the aftermath of his loss, what became clear is that he got overwhelmed by this, well, many things, right? We're talking about self-harm, we're talking about a lot of things, but the thing that stuck most with me was the sense of being overwhelmed with despair over not being where he thought he should be in life at 24.
Mhm.
And it blew me away because I'm like, you're fucking 24. You're not supposed to be anywhere. You're supposed to suck. Like, some people at 20, in their early 20s, are savants and they're amazing at whatever it is they're doing.
Mhm.
99% of 20-year-olds suck at whatever it is they're failing to try at. And, you know, that's something I didn't fully understand at 20, in my 20s, but like, I feel like it was easier to engage with that reality, 20 years ago when I was in my 20s. But now there's something about, I don't know if it's social media. I don't just know if it's the current social zeitgeist. In this conversation, we talked about the fact that my sense of self and identity is much more detached from my social media personas than he was. And like, it's hard for me to fully like get his struggle with, goals and relevancy and greatness and dreams, and how that intertwines with his presentation of self online. But the point I'm trying to get to is that I don't know what it is, but I feel like there is a problem with everyone, but speaking specifically to men, thinking that you're supposed to be having more and doing more
Mhm.
than you are at such a young age. The
Mhm.
only reason why my videos are so good is because I taught kids for 10 years, then had my own fucking kids. And I married a woman who was challenging and has her own complexities that I had to learn and understand. And I've buried friends, and I've lost jobs, and I've read books, and I've had fights, and I've lived so much life that goes into these video essays. They're effortless to me. I know, so at the risk of sounding egotistical, it's nothing for me to make these videos compared to what I'm assuming other people go through, because other people can't put out hour and 90-minute videos every month like I'm doing right now. And like, that's not me bragging. I just got a head start because I'm fucking 40 and I survived that youth angst where I was trying to define myself. And I will say, if the Manosphere was around when I was in my 20s, hell yeah, I'd have gotten sucked in for a moment. I'd have definitely dabbled because I felt the same thing you guys feel. And what I realized had came across in a lot of my Manosphere content was, and maybe comes across in a lot of my content in general, because I want to, I started being called uncle. Not that wasn't something I entered into the discourse. That was an energy that people seem to glean from me.
Mhm.
And I think that's from me wanting young people to just like give yourself grace. That's the end of that. That's the point of this rant. Is you don't have to be the type of man you fantasize about being when you were in middle school or high school or undergrad. You don't have to be that right now. You don't have to be that ever. But even if that is truly your goal, it doesn't feel any different to be that at 40. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And you probably can't be that, genuinely speaking, until you've gotten the experience and time under you. And you know, give yourself grace in the process of making that happen. Because when you rush it, when you feel like you're behind, when you worry, when you have your existential crises over the life you thought you're supposed to live, that low key capitalism has tricked you into thinking you desire, and is also explicitly keeping away from you at the same time.
Mhm.
Ironically, when you get over that and you just kind of just vibe for a second, I don't know, just vibe for a couple of years, y'all. You got time. Don't kill yourself literally and like figuratively trying to keep up with this facade of manhood that is elusive literally over time and space.
That's dead on. That's like a it's something that I think I failed to fully articulate, and something that I feel like I had to kind of come to terms with is the sort of emptiness that you can feel that I think is especially attached to not living up to certain ideals,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be gender or other roles, and that once you start achieving these things, yeah, there's rewards if you start achieving them. Yeah, there's rewards, but there's always that kind of emptiness that you
Yeah,
always need to have fulfilled, and it's usually based on externalities. And if you're not achieving them, you feel like a complete failure, and that emptiness kind of eats away at you. And I
yeah,
kind of felt that I don't know, like I read there was Suzuki's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, that he talks a lot about kind of emptiness and that instead of actually constantly trying to fill it up, that there's some utility in emptiness. And I think that's what you mean by kind of
mm,
just vibing, in the sense that once you stop trying to constantly pursue these things and try to like fill this void, and you actually just become more receptive to the environment around you and the people around you and the
yeah,
community, then you might actually have a better idea of what is fulfilling for you.
yeah.
Maybe it isn't making a bunch of money. Maybe it isn't becoming this man that you wanted to be when you were a kid or something like that. I think that was a very well said conclusion.
I hope. I always have angst about not having the final editorial vision for my rants. So I'm always,
No,
when I'm talking, I'm speaking from the heart. But as soon as I stop talking, I'm like, what the fuck did I just say?
no, it was very clear.
I hope
Um,
it was. I hope it was.
yeah, and thank you for coming on.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah,
Where's this?
and
Because do you put these on your channel or because?
oh, I put it on the channel, and then I also put it on Spotify and Apple Music.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Okay. All right. And you
All
can
right.
check out FD's channel. I'll link it in the description. And thanks for listening.
Indeed. Thank you for having me. Thanks for listening, y'all. Peace and blessings.